Welcome to Nocturnal Tales. Tonight we're heading to Norfolk, to a lonely country house called Greylake, a place of polished manners, locked doors, and family loyalty that feels a little too well rehearsed. A wealthy patriarch is found murdered in a quiet room by the lake, and the obvious suspect is waiting right where the police like to find him. But at Greylake, the danger isn't noise or chaos. It's calm, it's control, and it's the small missing detail everyone keeps stepping around. As always, this is an original Nocturnal Tales story, written in the spirit and style of the great Golden Age mysteries, but entirely our own creation. And if you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. The links are in the description. Now then, listen closely, keep your conclusions in check, and do not trust the obvious too soon. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Lady at 9:30. I have often observed that a crisis may enter a room in one of two ways. It may burst in noisily, trailing confusion, raised voices, telegrams, policemen, and all the usual apparatus by which the British like to make misfortune immediately public. Or it may arrive quietly, with admirable gloves, perfect self-command, and a voice so well governed that one only realizes afterward that something fatal has already begun. It was in the latter fashion that Mrs. Eleanor Ashcombe came to us. At the time, Poirot and I were in London, and I am bound to say, enjoying one of those brief periods of tranquility which come too seldom in the life of a detective, and far too often in the life of his friend. There had been no murders for nearly a week in our immediate orbit, and Poirot, having completed some tiresome business involving a forged miniature and a clergyman with gambling debts, had settled into a state of exact domestic satisfaction. The weather, moreover, was turning, and there was in the air that first thin chill of autumn which seems to sharpen every outline in London without improving any of its morals. George had just brought in the coffee when the bell rang. A card was presented. Mrs. Eleanor Ashcombe. "Show the lady in," said Poirot. She entered with quick, controlled movements, and stood for a moment just inside the room, looking from one of us to the other. She was perhaps 32 or 33, fair rather than dark, with a face that might have seemed merely agreeable until one noticed the remarkable steadiness of the eyes. There was distinction in her appearance, but not flamboyance. She wore dark blue, very simply cut, and a small hat of the same shade. I remember thinking that she looked like exactly what she was later revealed to be, a woman accustomed to good breeding, good houses, and the necessity of behaving well in both. Poirot bowed. "Pray sit down, madame." She sat, removed her gloves with care, and said at once, "Monsieur Poirot, I have come to ask for your help in a very terrible matter. My father has been murdered. There are some announcements which, by their very directness, deprive one of any intelligent reply." I muttered something inadequate. Poirot merely inclined his head. "Your father's name?" "Sir Matthew Carberry, of Greylake." The name was not wholly unfamiliar to me. Greylake, as I recalled, was a place in Norfolk, and Sir Matthew Carberry one of those wealthy men of business who acquire a country house, a baronetcy, and the vague distrust of their neighbours in the same decade. "When did this happen?" asked Poirot. "Yesterday evening, at about 8 o'clock, so far as they can judge." "And you were present in the house?" "Yes." Poirot folded his hands. "Then you will tell me everything from the beginning." She gave a small, grateful nod. "My father bought Greylake 10 years ago after my mother died. He had made a fortune in shipping and insurance and retired, as he said, to cultivate peace. Unfortunately, he had no gift for it. He was a difficult man in health, in temper, and in domestic life. He liked obedience, disliked contradiction, and expected gratitude as a matter of course. There was no bitterness in the recital. That struck me at once. She spoke as a dutiful daughter might speak who had long ago ceased to idealize, and equally long ago decided to endure. "Our household at present is a small one," she continued. "My husband, Hugh Ashcombe, and I have been staying with my father for the last month. There is also my younger cousin, Miss Frances Dean, who has lived with him since childhood. Dr. Evans, my father's physician, who has been at Greylake these 3 days because my father's health had been troublesome, and Mr. Basil Crewe, my father's secretary. And the servants. The usual number for a country house, though fewer than in my mother's time. The butler, housekeeper, maids, footman, cook, and so on." Poirot nodded. "Now, as to the death." She drew a breath. "My father dined in his room last night. He was out of sorts and had quarrelled earlier in the day with my husband over some estate matter. After dinner he asked for coffee to be sent to the Chinese room." "The Chinese room?" "It is a small room on the ground floor looking toward the lake. My father used it for papers and private interviews. At 8:30, the butler went in answer to the bell and found him dead." "In what manner?" "He had been stabbed, with a small Eastern dagger that usually stood among the curiosities in the room." I confess I started. "Good Lord." "Yes." She pressed her fingers together once, then relaxed them. "The police were sent for immediately. They are there now." "And what is their theory?" She hesitated. "They believe my husband may have done it." That, I thought, gave the thing at once a more human shape. Fathers and sons-in-law have come to grief over less than estate matters. Poirot, however, showed no sign of any such vulgar train of thought. "Why?" "Because they quarrelled. Because Hugh was seen going in the direction of the Chinese room shortly before 8. And because the side door by the terrace was open, which suggests that the murderer may have left that way. My husband had been outside earlier." "Was he found in the room?" "No. He had gone to the stables. He returned when the alarm was raised." "And he denies entering the room?" "He says he went as far as the passage, realized he was still angry, and turned back." Poirot considered. "This is not a very devastating admission." "No," she said quietly, "but my husband is not one of those men who sound convincing when defending themselves. He is reserved, proud, and easily made to appear cold. The police inspector has already taken against him." I noticed then the first true appeal in her manner, not dramatics, not tears. Only the controlled urgency of a woman trying to keep order while events moved faster than she could manage. "And you, madame?" asked Poirot. "What do you think?" "I think my husband is innocent." "Because you know him incapable of murder?" "Yes." "That is not always a useful criterion." "No. But it happens to be true." There was something in the plainness of that answer which impressed me strongly. It seemed neither sentimental nor blind, merely firm. Poirot said, "Did Sir Matthew have enemies?" She gave the faintest of smiles. "My father collected them. Whether any of them would travel to Norfolk to stab him with one of his own ornaments is another matter." "Had he received threats?" "Not that I know of, but he was secretive. He kept many papers to himself, and for the last week he had been particularly irritable." "On account of illness?" "Possibly, or of business, or of something else." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "What something else?" She looked at him directly. "Yesterday morning he received a note. I cannot tell you its contents. He put it away too quickly, but I know it disturbed him." "A letter?" "A note delivered by hand. Very short. He read it at breakfast and said almost nothing afterward. Twice I saw him touch the pocket where he had put it, as though to assure himself it was still there. And later, it was gone. Gone? The police have not found it. Poirot was silent for a moment. Did your father destroy papers as a rule? Never. He kept everything. Bills from 10 years ago, tiresome invitations, old legal correspondence, everything. So the missing note is of interest? I thought so. I said, could someone in the house have taken it? Her eyes came to me. That is what frightens me. It was very well said, and perfectly natural. There are occasions when a woman's simplicity can be far more persuasive than another's passion. Poirot rose and went to the window. Presently he turned. The police know you have come to me? No. Why not? A faint flush touched her cheeks. Because they would think it melodramatic. Because my husband objects to private detectives on principle, and because if I am wrong, if this is merely a hideous domestic suspicion that will right itself, I do not wish to have made the matter more public than necessary. I could not help approving that. It had restraint and sense. Poirot asked one more question. Who inherits Sir Matthew's money? She answered at once. Chiefly I do. There are legacies to my cousin and some charitable provisions, but the estate and the greater part of the fortune come to me. It was so frank an admission that, absurdly enough, it increased my confidence in her. Poirot looked at her with grave politeness. You understand, madame, that I must consider everyone. Of course. Even those who come to ask for my help. Yes. Good. Then Hastings and I will go to Greylake on the noon train. For the first time she seemed to let herself breathe. Thank you. She stood, drew on her gloves, and then paused. There is one thing more, she said. My father was not loved. I should not like you to think me heartless if I say that plainly. But he was not stabbed in a moment of shouting anger. The room was orderly. Nothing was broken. That is what I cannot forget. Whoever killed him went there calmly. Poirot inclined his head. A useful observation. When she had gone, I turned at once to him. A bad business, but she seems a most admirable woman. She seems, said Poirot, a woman of intelligence and self-command. Well, so she is, and the husband, poor devil, is plainly in a beastly position. Possibly. I stared at him. My dear Poirot, you do not suspect the husband already? I suspect, said Poirot, settling the teaspoons into a straighter line, everybody, but at present I suspect nobody more than is necessary. That was like Poirot, annoyingly balanced. At noon we were on our way, and by late afternoon arrived at Greylake, which proved to be one of those broad, pale houses, standing a little apart from the world, as though wealth had once intended privacy and got loneliness instead. A stretch of lawn fell toward dark water at the rear, and the reeds by the lake moved in the wind with a dry whispering sound that I did not much care for. Mrs. Ashcombe met us in the hall. She looked more tired than in London, but no less composed. You are kind to have come so quickly. Poirot bowed. Not kind, madame. Prompt. She gave the ghost of a smile. The inspector is in the Chinese room. My husband is with him. As she led us across the black and white paving of the hall, I noticed a young fair girl at the foot of the stairs watching us with frightened eyes, and beyond her a dark, handsome man standing rigidly by the fireplace. The house had that peculiar stillness which comes when death and suspicion have taken up residence together. At the door of the Chinese room, Mrs. Ashcombe stopped. Before she could open it, the door from within was flung back, and a man I took to be the local inspector came out with Hugh Ashcombe close behind him. The husband was a tall, clean-built fellow of about 35, with an honest face made suddenly haggard. He looked, Not guilty, but trapped, which is not at all the same thing, though the police often behave as if it were. The inspector glanced at us sharply. "And who may you be?" Poirot stepped forward. "My name is Hercule Poirot. I have been invited by Mrs. Ashcombe." The inspector's mouth tightened in exactly the way such men's mouths do. "I see." Hugh Ashcombe looked from Poirot to his wife. For a second something passed between them, relief on his part, steady reassurance on hers. Then he said with an effort at composure, "Thank God. Perhaps now we may get at the truth." And that, as it seemed to all of us then, was precisely why we had come. Chapter 2. The Room by the Lake. I have never known a house in which a violent death had occurred that did not appear, within a very short time, to have developed a conscience. Doors, stairs, carpets, curtain rings, the very clocks upon the mantelpieces, seem to grow attentive. One has the disagreeable sense that the place knows more than it intends to say. Greylake, which may once have been merely imposing, had already become confidential. Inspector Bell, the local man in charge, was not, I think, pleased by our arrival, though he disguised the fact beneath a laborious civility. He was a square, weathered fellow with a reddish moustache and the air of one accustomed to practical certainties. He had already, I gathered, formed a solid opinion upon the matter, and had no wish to see it broken up into subtleties. Still, Mrs. Ashcombe had brought us there, and Bell, though far from enthusiastic, could scarcely show us the door. "You may look about, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "I've nothing to conceal. I only hope you won't encourage false hopes where there shouldn't be any." Poirot bowed. "I never encourage false hopes, Inspector. They are too expensive." Bell grunted, uncertain whether he had been answered or rebuked. The Chinese room was at the back of the house on the ground floor, with long windows giving onto the lawn and the lake beyond. It had evidently once been intended for frivolity, and now served for privacy. A number of lacquer cabinets stood along the walls. There were embroidered panels in black and gold, and on the mantel rested a row of little grotesque ivory carvings, which I found singularly unpleasant. The entire room possessed a chilly prettiness, and I thought it a bad place in which to die. Sir Matthew Carbery no longer lay there, of course, but the scene remained substantially as it had been found. A broad writing table stood near the fire. One chair had been pushed back. Beside it, on the carpet, the inspector indicated the place where the body had fallen. "The dagger came from over there," he said, pointing to a small cabinet on which stood several curios, among them an empty velvet mount, clearly meant to hold the missing weapon. A sharp little Eastern thing with a carved jade handle, decorative enough, but quite capable of doing the work. Poirot nodded. His attention had already moved elsewhere. "Your account, if you please, Inspector." Bell produced it with professional readiness. Sir Matthew had dined alone in his bedroom at 7 o'clock. He had then come downstairs, crossed to the Chinese room at about 20 minutes to 8, and rang shortly after 8 for coffee. There was no answer. At 8:30, the butler, Mr. Wayne, becoming uneasy, had gone in person. Receiving no reply and finding the door unlatched but closed, he entered and discovered his master dead beside the writing table. The side door opening onto the terrace had been left ajar. "The doctor places death between 8 and 1/4 past," said Bell. "No signs of a struggle. One thrust, expertly or luckily delivered. There were papers on the desk, but nothing disturbed. No robbery, no stranger seen about the place. And Mr. Hugh Ashcombe admits himself to have been in the passage leading here within a few minutes of the probable time." "And he did not enter?" asked Poirot. "So he says." Bell's tone made plain what he thought of that. Poirot moved slowly about the room, looking not only at the obvious things, but at the irrelevant ones too, which was always maddening to police and servants alike. He examined the chair, the windows, the fireplace, the lacquer cabinets, even the ornaments upon the mantel. He asked to see the side door, opened it, and stood a moment looking out over the terrace toward the lake. The water lay grey and hard beneath a lowering sky. Near the bank the reeds stirred. Beyond them, on the farther side, a fringe of dark trees stood in thick silence. Said Poirot. Bell went on doggedly, as though determined to keep the matter in sensible channels. There were only 5 people in the house socially speaking at the time. Sir Matthew himself, Mrs. Ashcombe, her husband, Miss Frances Dean, Dr. Evans. The secretary, Mr. Crewe, had gone over account books in the study and says he was there till after 8:30. The servants were below stairs or in the back regions. Nobody from outside had reason to come. Poirot turned. Reason is such a large word, Inspector. Opportunity is often smaller and more useful. Bell ignored that. Mr. Ashcombe had quarrelled with Sir Matthew in the morning, and again, according to one of the maids who heard raised voices, in the late afternoon. Over money? Over drainage on one of the tenant farms, apparently, though I don't suppose that was the whole of it. No, said Poirot, probably not. Bell folded his arms. Sir Matthew was not an easy gentleman. Mr. Ashcombe had no independent means to speak of. He had married the daughter, came to live on the father's property, and seems to have had to endure a good deal. It happens. It was unpleasantly put, but not without plausibility. Poirot asked, "And the missing note of which Mrs. Ashcombe spoke?" The inspector's expression altered slightly. So she mentioned that. She did. Bell gave a short nod. Yes. The butler remembers a note being brought by hand in the morning. No envelope. Sir Matthew read it at breakfast and put it in his pocket. It has not been found. It may mean something. It may mean nothing. Did anyone see the handwriting? Only Mrs. Ashcombe says she noticed it was written in a large, slanting hand. Poirot said nothing. Inspector Bell then proposed that we speak first with the husband, who was in the morning room. Hugh Ashcombe rose as we entered. He had the same look of strained self-command as before, but what had struck me in the hall struck me again now. He looked like a man under pressure, not a man in moral concealment. There is a difference, though I would be the last to claim that I always detected correctly. "You wish to see me," he said. Poirot introduced himself, and Hugh made a brief gesture of impatience. "Yes, my wife told me. I'm glad she sent for you, though I'd rather have been spared the necessity. The whole thing is damned grotesque." Poirot seated himself. "Then help me to make it less so. You quarrelled with Sir Matthew?" Hugh laughed shortly. "Yes, more than once. So did nearly everyone who lived under his roof for long. Yet the police are interested particularly in your quarrels. Because I am the obvious man." His mouth tightened. "The dependent son-in-law with a temper and no fortune of his own. It is a stock part." "And did you play it well?" Hugh looked at him sharply, then, to my surprise, smiled. "Perhaps too well." He gave his account plainly. In the late afternoon he had indeed had sharp words with Sir Matthew regarding the management of the estate. Sir Matthew, who knew little and interfered much, had accused him of extravagance, incompetence, and something very near ingratitude. Hugh had left the room in anger. After dinner, he went out toward the yard to speak with the head groom about a mare that had gone lame. Returning by the side passage near the Chinese room, he hesitated, thought of going in to make some attempt at peace, then changed his mind and went on to the gun room, where he remained some minutes examining a damaged stock. From there he went to the stables and was still there when the alarm was raised. "Who can confirm that?" "The groom saw me in the yard after 8:30. Before that, no one, perhaps." "That is awkward." "Yes." Poirot regarded him. "You deny entering the Chinese room?" "Absolutely." Did you see anyone else near it? No. Did Sir Matthew have enemies? Hugh gave a shrug. Yes. But enemies in the abstract do not often walk into Norfolk drawing rooms and use daggers. Did he fear anything lately? There was the least pause. He was preoccupied. About what? I don't know. You are sure? Hugh met his gaze. No, I am not sure, but I know nothing I can prove. There was honesty in that answer, but also reserve. Poirot noticed it. You keep something back, monsieur. I keep back gossip. My wife has had enough to bear without idle invention. Poirot's voice softened. Ah, you protect her. Hugh flushed angrily. I protect no one. I merely refuse to drag in nonsense. Poirot let that pass. We next saw Miss Frances Dean, the cousin. She was the fair girl I had glimpsed on the stairs. 22, perhaps, pretty in a pale, nervous fashion, and so manifestly frightened by the whole business that I felt sorry for her at once. She had lived at Greylake, it seemed, since childhood, her own parents having died when she was young. Sir Matthew had educated and housed her, though not, I gathered, with any great warmth. He liked obedience, she said in a low voice, and regular hours, and silence at breakfast. Poirot inclined his head, as though these seemed quite natural preferences in a tyrant. Miss Dean had spent the evening in the drawing-room with Mrs. Ashcombe. Dr. Evans came in and out. Mr. Crewe was in the study. Hugh Ashcombe passed through once on his way outside. She had heard nothing unusual. Asked about the note, she said only that Sir Matthew had been in a savage mood all day after receiving it. Did you know who sent it? No. Had your cousin any trouble with her father? At this, Frances looked distressed. Oh, not as you mean. Aunt Eleanor was always patient. She managed him better than anyone. The slip interested me. She had called Mrs. Ashcombe Aunt Eleanor from habit, rather than cousin, which suggested some long domestic intimacy. Was Sir Matthew fond of his daughter? Poirot asked. Frances hesitated. He depended on her. That, I thought, was perhaps more accurate. Dr. Evans proved a lean, dry, intelligent man with iron-grey hair and the professional bluntness that often conceals a good deal of tact. He had attended Sir Matthew for years and knew his constitution, his habits, and I should imagine his vices. His heart was bad, he said, his temper worse, but neither killed him. He had seen Sir Matthew shortly before dinner, and again for a moment in the passage just before 8. Sir Matthew had seemed agitated but not physically weak. He had sent Dr. Evans away rather sharply, saying he wished to be alone. Was that unusual? Not altogether. He disliked medical attendance unless he had sent for it himself. And his mind? Asked Poirot. Mallory gave him a curious look. You mean, was he rational? Entirely. Secretive, domineering, suspicious, but not unsound. Suspicious? He liked to know what people were doing. He liked even better for them not to know what he was doing. That is a useful distinction, murmured Poirot. Mr. Basil Crewe, the secretary, was the last. He was a dark, smooth young man in impeccably correct clothes, with excellent manners and an expression of cultivated regret. I disliked him on sight, though I should be hard put to say why. Perhaps it was that he seemed too perfectly adjusted to the tragedy, as though he had selected a proper degree of solemnity and meant to maintain it. He had been with Sir Matthew for 4 years, managed correspondence, accounts, and appointments, and clearly considered himself indispensable. Sir Matthew was a man of enormous business capacity, he said. One had to be constantly available. And were you available yesterday evening? Said Poirot. Crewe smiled faintly. I was in the study checking farm expenditure. Inspector Bell has already seen the books. I heard nothing. Nothing at all. No cry. No movement. I am afraid Greylake is built to keep its secrets." That was a neat phrase. Too neat, perhaps. Poirot asked him about the morning note. Crewe admitted he had not seen it, only knew from Sir Matthew's instruction that no caller was to be admitted afterward without express permission. "And did anyone call?" "Not that I am aware of." When we were at last alone in the corridor, I said, "Well, upon my soul, any of them might have done it except perhaps the cousin." Poirot glanced at me. "Why except the cousin?" "She is a child. She is 22, and 22 has committed many crimes before now." "Granted, but she hasn't the nerve." "Perhaps." He paused. "And Mrs. Ashcombe? What about her?" He adjusted his cuffs. "You continue to admire her?" "Certainly. She has been admirable throughout." "Yes," said Poirot, "throughout." That annoyed me, because it suggested he was privately making one of those detestable little reservations he would not yet share. By the time dinner was over, an uncomfortable meal, thinly supported by the butler's efforts at propriety, the house had sunk into that peculiar hush which follows a day of questioning. Doors closed softly. Servants moved like apologetic ghosts. Somewhere a clock sounded 9 with intrusive clarity. Poirot, however, was not ready for bed. He insisted on walking out by the terrace into the night air, and I accompanied him, collar up, for the wind off the lake had sharpened considerably. The lawn fell away before us, silvered in places by a reluctant moon. The reeds whispered again. Farther out, the dark surface of the lake showed only a dull gleam where the clouds broke. Poirot stood still, looking toward the water. "What do you make of it?" I asked. He did not answer at once. "At present," he said at last, "I make of it that everybody tells the truth, but not all of it." "Well, that is always the case." "Yes, but here it is more interesting. They are not merely concealing facts. They are arranging impressions." I stared. "Who is?" He gave an impatient movement. "Everybody, perhaps. Or one person very well." "Come, Poirot, that means nothing." "It means, my friend, that the dead man was difficult. The son-in-law looked convenient. The daughter appears loyal. The doctor is dry. The secretary smooth. The cousin frightened. Each is in character. That is what troubles me." I laughed. "You are impossible. If people behave naturally, you mistrust them. If they behave oddly, you mistrust them more." "That is because human nature is usually mixed, whereas at Greylake everything is beginning to seem arranged in separate boxes." "Then which box contains the murderer?" Poirot's face was unreadable. "That," he said, "is what I hope not to decide too quickly." At that moment, something moved among the reeds below the terrace path. I caught Poirot by the sleeve. "There!" A figure had emerged from the darkness near the lake edge and was coming quickly up the path toward the house. For one absurd second, I thought of smugglers, or escaped lunatics, or some melodramatic intruder from the outer world. Then the figure came into the moonlight. It was Mrs. Ashcombe. She stopped short upon seeing us. Even in the dim light, I could see that she was pale. "Monsieur Poirot. Captain Hastings. I did not know anyone was out here." Poirot bowed slightly. "And you, madame? You take the air at this hour?" "Yes. I could not sleep." She added after the briefest pause, "The house is unbearable." That was natural enough. Poirot said gently, "You had gone to the lake?" She looked beyond us toward the dark water. "I often walk there." For an instant there was a simplicity about her that disarmed me completely. A daughter in mourning, a difficult marriage threatened, a house full of suspicion. What more ordinary thing than that she should seek solitude? Poirot said only, "One must hope, madam, that tomorrow brings more light." She gave him a quick glance I could not read. "Yes," she said, "one must hope so." Then she passed us and went into the house. I turned to Poirot. He was still looking toward the lake. He said. "What now?" He slipped his hands into his coat sleeves. "Now, Hastings, I think tomorrow we shall ask what was in Sir Matthew Carberry's missing note." And though at the time I thought this merely another turn in the inquiry, I remember now that he spoke with unusual exactness, as though the whole matter had narrowed in his mind to that one absent scrap of paper. Chapter 3. What Sir Matthew Feared. The morning at Greylake broke colourless and damp, with a low sky pressing upon the lake until house and water seemed all of a piece. I came down early and found Poirot already dressed with his usual precision and seated before the coffee-pot in an attitude of extreme neatness and, as I know now, extremely deceptive calm. He looked up as I entered. "You have slept well, Hastings?" "Not particularly. This house gets on one's nerves." "Yes, it has an atmosphere. That's one word for it. I've been thinking about Mrs. Ashcombe." Poirot raised his eyebrows. "Still?" "She is plainly carrying the whole business on her shoulders. If the police arrest her husband and the old man's money is left tangled up for months, she will have the house, the servants, the cousin, and the whole pack of worries to manage." Poirot stirred his coffee. "You are very sympathetic this morning." Well, anyone would be. He made no answer to that. Presently, Inspector Bell joined us, and with him Dr. Evans, who had motored over from the village after passing the night in his own house nearby. The doctor greeted us with the same spare, practical manner as before, and Bell at once returned to the matter that seemed to irritate him most: the missing note. "We've turned out the dead man's room, desk, papers, and clothes," he said. "No sign of it. If it exists, somebody removed it." Poirot inclined his head. "And that somebody may have had a reason independent of the murder." Bell gave a doubtful grunt. "Or the same reason. Depends what was in it." Dr. Evans stood warming his hands at the fire. "If you want my view, Sir Matthew had been under strain for a week. He concealed it, but not from me. He was sleeping badly, snapping more than usual, and his pulse was not what I liked." "Did he confide in you?" asked Poirot. "No, he never confided. He commanded, complained, and occasionally lied." That amused Poirot. "A useful patient." "He was a very rich patient," said Dr. Evans dryly, "which often reconciles one to defects." Bell, however, wanted movement. "I am going to question the servants again, particularly about the note. Someone must have seen the messenger. You can talk to whom you like, Monsieur Poirot, so long as it doesn't interfere." Poirot murmured something civil, and then, to my surprise, requested another interview with Mrs. Ashcombe before anyone else. We found her in the morning room writing letters with a composure I thought extraordinary. She rose at once and put the letters aside. "You have news?" "Not yet, madame, only questions." "Then I am at your service." Poirot seated himself opposite her. "You told me Sir Matthew received a note yesterday morning. I want you now to tell me exactly what you saw." She reflected a moment. The tray had just been set down. My father opened the folded paper while the coffee was being poured. His face changed at once. He read it again very quickly, then put it into the breast pocket of his dressing gown. "Did he speak?" "Only to ask who had brought it." "And what was the answer?" "That a village boy had left it with the maid at the side entrance." "Had you time to see anything written?" "Only that it was brief, and written in a rather large hand, not a business hand." "Male or female?" She hesitated. "I thought female, but I could not swear to it." "Did Sir Matthew go out that morning?" Yes, he walked by the lake after breakfast, though the weather was poor. Alone? So far as I know. Poirot nodded, and then, in a tone so casual that even I nearly missed the change, asked, "Was your father afraid of anything?" Mrs. Ashcombe's fingers, resting on the blotter, tightened just enough for me to notice. My father did not think in those terms. "That is not what I asked." She looked at him steadily. He disliked losing control. Ah, that is as near fear as he ever came. Poirot studied her a moment longer. "Did he ever speak to you of your mother?" The question appeared so irrelevant that I all but started. Mrs. Ashcombe, too, looked surprised. "Very little." After that, there was little more to get from her, unless one counted impressions, and Poirot, though always attentive to impressions, rarely admitted it in words. When we were again in the corridor, I said, "Well, I still see nothing against her. If anything, she seems more straightforward each time." Poirot gave me a glance. "Possibly." "Oh, for heaven's sake. You say that as if straightforwardness were some exotic vice." "My friend, I say only that she is self-possessed." "That does not make her a murderess." "No, it makes her a woman capable of governing herself. There is a difference." This was maddeningly inconclusive, and before I could press him, Bell called us into the front hall with the result of his fresh inquiries. One of the maids had indeed seen the note brought. The messenger was not a village boy after all, but a local fisherman's son from the hamlet on the far side of the lake. "That's better," said Bell. "At least a real person. We've sent for him." The boy arrived half an hour later. A solemn, red-eared lad of perhaps 14, who twisted his cap in both hands and looked terrified of the carpet. Bell questioned him in our presence. Yes, he had brought the note. No, he did not know what was in it. Yes, it had been given to him by a lady. "What lady?" asked Bell sharply. The boy shifted from foot to foot. "I don't know her name, sir. She had a veil on." "Where was this?" "Down by the old landing place, sir, on t'other side." "Had you seen her before?" "No, sir." "Would you know her again?" The boy looked miserable. "Maybe not, sir. She spoke soft-like, gave me a shilling." Bell swore under his breath. Poirot, however, seemed interested. "What exactly did she say?" The boy screwed up his face with effort. "Just as I was to take it straight up to Greylake and say it was for Sir Matthew's own hand, and not to stop nowhere." "Did she wait?" "No, sir. She walked off by the trees." Bell dismissed him in disgust. "That gets us nowhere." "On the contrary," said Poirot mildly, "it gets us to a lady in a veil by the lake." Bell snorted. "Or to a lie invented by the murderer." Poirot spread his hands. "All witness evidence is a mixture, Inspector. That is why one must handle it with care." At luncheon the atmosphere was even worse than on the previous night. Hugh Ashcombe was present but silent. Frances Dean scarcely touched her food. Mr. Crewe, immaculate as ever, produced appropriate phrases of restraint and regret, which made me dislike him more. Mrs. Ashcombe alone preserved the forms of ordinary life, speaking when necessary to the servants, and once or twice drawing Frances gently into conversation, lest the poor girl break down altogether. Afterward, Poirot asked to see Sir Matthew's study and business papers. These were not in the Chinese room, but in a drier apartment at the front of the house, lined with books he had almost certainly never read. Here Crewe proved useful. He opened dispatch boxes, identified correspondence, and supplied dates with an efficiency that ought to have been admirable. Poirot asked suddenly, "Did Sir Matthew have any business connection across the lake?" Crewe looked blank. "Across the lake? None that I know of." "Any cottages there belonging to the estate?" "One or two, let to labourers or left empty." "An old landing place?" Yes, though it has hardly been used for years. Poirot had by then taken to examining cheque-books and memoranda. And Sir Matthew was generous? Crewe smiled faintly, not by nature, but by calculation. That is nearer. It emerged that Sir Matthew had made certain private payments over the last 18 months, small regular sums entered not through the main household books, but from his personal account. To whom? Asked Poirot. Crewe's expression altered only slightly. I do not know. Sir Matthew wrote those cheques himself. Yet you noticed them. One notices anything repeated. And did you ask? Crewe looked almost shocked. My dear Monsieur Poirot, one did not ask Sir Matthew Carberry such questions. When Crewe had gone, I said at once, blackmail. Poirot shrugged. It is possible. Well, what else? Secret payments, a mysterious note, a woman at the lake. Good Lord, it's obvious. Yes, said Poirot. Too obvious, perhaps. I was beginning to tire of this phrase of his. In the afternoon he insisted on walking around the far side of the lake. It was a disagreeable expedition. The ground was soft, the reeds high, and a thin rain had begun to fall. We found the old landing place exactly where the boy had indicated, a decaying wooden structure thrust a little way into the dark water, with a boathouse beyond, long disused and smelling of rot. Poirot searched about it minutely. What are you looking for? Something thrown away, something hidden, or nothing at all. He found nothing. Nevertheless, he remained thoughtful, and on our way back we encountered Francis Dene under a clump of beeches, clearly startled to see us. Miss Dean, said Poirot, you walk also? She coloured. I could not stay in the house. Poirot's tone was kind. Understandably. Tell me, mademoiselle, did your cousin's father ever receive visitors by the lake rather than at the front door? She stared. By the lake, never openly. Secretly, then? She gave a little movement of distress. I do not know. Yet you think it possible. Francis looked down. Sir Matthew did many things one did not question. Poirot said quietly, and Mrs. Ashcombe, did she question them? At that, Francis looked up quickly. Eleanor, no, she managed him. In what way? She could calm him when no one else could. The girl's voice softened. She has always had courage. It was warmly said and natural enough. Still, there was something in the answer, a note almost of dependence, that stayed with me. When we returned to the house, Belle had more news. The dagger had yielded no usable prints. More significantly, a servant remembered seeing the side door to the terrace standing open well before the body was discovered. That weakens the case against Ashcombe a bit, Belle admitted reluctantly. Anyone might have used it. Or wished it thought so, said Poirot. Belle ignored that. Then came the first real disturbance of the day. Hugh Ashcombe demanded a private word with Poirot, and, after some hesitation, obtained it in my presence. There's something I ought perhaps to have said before, he began. I didn't because it seemed dirty, and because it concerns my wife. Poirot watched him closely. Yes? Hugh's jaw hardened. For the last few weeks I believed my father-in-law was using his money, or the threat of withholding it, to keep my wife tied to Greylake and under his influence. He had done so in lesser ways before. He disliked our living independently. He liked to have her near him, arranging his meals, soothing his tantrums, managing his papers. It was unnatural. I exclaimed, "Do you mean—" He cut me off sharply. I mean only that he was selfish and possessive to an intolerable degree. Poirot said softly, "And your wife?" She made excuses. She always made excuses. Out of affection? Hugh laughed bitterly. Out of habit? Out of duty? out of having been trained from childhood to think his comfort the center of every room. There was real feeling there, not theatrical, not convenient. At the time it strengthened, rather than weakened, my view that he was innocent. Poirot asked, "Did you quarrel with Sir Matthew on this account?" "Yes." "Violently?" "Yes." "And did anyone hear?" "Probably half the damned house." When he had gone, I said, "Well, there you are. Another motive, but not for murder. At least not in the ordinary sense. More likely the old brute had made himself intolerable." Poirot did not answer at once. At last he said, "Hastings, when one person dominates a household for years, the survivors do not always describe the domination in the same words, but they feel its shape." I blinked at him. "Meaning what?" "Meaning that Greylake has been governed by fear, dependence, secrecy, and habit. Such places are very fertile for crime." Later, as I prepared for bed, I found him still seated by the fire, not moving, his fingertips pressed together. "You've been chasing ghosts all day, lake shores, old rooms, vanished notes, private checks, family tensions. Have you at least some theory?" He looked up. "Yes." I brightened. "Then what is it?" "That I'm not yet clever enough." This astonished me so much that I could only stare. Poirot gave a faint, almost rueful smile. "There is here," he said, "a pattern I do not yet see. Somebody wishes me to look in one direction. The difficulty is that the direction may also be the true one." "Then where do we stand?" He rose and smoothed his sleeves. "On uncertain ground, my friend, which is why tomorrow we shall examine Sir Matthew's will." And with that he went to bed, leaving me with the uncomfortable impression that for once even Poirot was moving, not with his usual serene superiority, but through a mist as thick as my own. And now, before we resume, a brief word from the Bureau. Many of you ask where our stories may be found beyond YouTube. The answer is quite simple. Only one story makes its way to YouTube each week. Beyond that, we publish 3 new stories every week on Patreon, where supporters help us keep the lamps lit, the papers in order, and the next mystery upon the writing desk. For those who are not in a position to support us there, 2 of those weekly stories are also released on Spotify. And Spotify is free. There is no need for a paid membership. Much like YouTube, listening there without paying still supports the creator through advertisements. For those who prefer to support the show more directly, we also have Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal, and you will find those links in the description below. The plain truth is that our YouTube channel is not monetized. That means these stories continue only because listeners choose to support them through Patreon, Spotify, Buy Me a Coffee, and PayPal. Without that support, productions of this kind become very difficult to continue. For those who wish to step inside the archive, Patreon offers The Listening Room, $2.99 a month, ad-free episodes and early access, The Writing Table, $12 a month, voting on themes, behind-the-scenes notes, character sheets, inspirations, alternate endings, and your name in our monthly credits. The Archive Society, $30 a month. Quarterly ebook anthologies in PDF and EPUB, with your name printed among the patrons of the Archive Society. Our thanks, as ever, to those who make these stories possible. And now, back to the case. Chapter 4. The Will in the Dispatch Box. If there is one thing more unpleasant than a house after murder, it is a house after breakfast on the day when solicitors arrive. There is then added to grief, fear, and suspicion that peculiarly English anxiety which money introduces into all human sorrow. No one speaks of it directly. Everyone feels it. The servants step more softly, the relatives become more correct, and even the innocent begin to look as though they are waiting to be measured for motives. It was Bell who told us that Sir Matthew's lawyer was expected from Norwich. "Mr. Latham," he said, "old family solicitor, or as near family as Carberry ever allowed. If there's anything useful in the will, we may as well know it." Poirot agreed readily enough, though I noticed that his interest in the will was of a slightly different sort from Bell's. The inspector wanted motive set down in legal terms. Poirot, as ever, wanted character. Mr. Latham arrived shortly before 11, a dry elderly man with a long upper lip, iron-grey whiskers, and that expression of professional discouragement which solicitors wear, I think, not only toward their clients, but toward the entire human race. He was shown into Sir Matthew's study, where Bell, Poirot, and I joined him. After a few formalities, Latham opened the leather dispatch box produced by Mr. Crewe and took out the relevant papers. "The existing will is dated 14 months ago," he said. "Sir Matthew executed it in my office in Norwich. The principal beneficiary is Mrs. Eleanor Ashcombe." Bell gave a short nod, as though this merely confirmed what he already knew. "Specifically?" asked Poirot. "The house at Greylake, the residue of the estate, and the greater part of the personal fortune. There are smaller legacies to Miss Frances Dean, the servants, certain charities, and a modest annuity to an old clerk. Mr. Hugh Ashcombe is not named separately, no doubt because it was assumed he would benefit through his wife." "That is interesting," murmured Poirot. Bell said bluntly, "Any later one." Latham hesitated very slightly. There was discussion of a codicil. Bell leaned forward. "What kind of codicil?" "One placing certain property under settlement rather than outright transfer. Sir Matthew had become concerned, rightly or wrongly, about what he called mismanagement on the estate." "In other words," said Bell, "he wanted to keep his son-in-law's hands tied." Latham coughed. "I should not myself put it so crudely, but the tendency was in that direction." "Was it signed?" "No." "Drafted?" "Yes." "That improves Ashcombe's motive by half a mile," said Bell. Poirot, however, asked a different question. "Who knew of this proposed codicil?" Latham folded his hands. "I spoke of it to Sir Matthew, naturally. I may have referred to the practicalities in the hearing of Mr. Crewe on one occasion, since he handled appointments and papers. I certainly did not discuss it with the family." "And Sir Matthew?" "Sir Matthew discussed many things when angry that he later denied when calm." That, I thought, sounded like him. Latham went on to explain that the codicil, had it been executed, would not have disinherited Eleanor, but would have limited immediate control over certain lands and investments, with trustees appointed. The result, plainly enough, would have been to reduce Hugh Ashcombe's practical influence. Bell looked satisfied. It was one more stone in the wall he was building around the husband. Poirot merely thanked the solicitor and asked to see the draft itself. He read it attentively, then returned it without comment. When we were alone again, Bell said, "There you have it." Poirot smoothed the cuff of his sleeve. "Inspector, the will confirms what we already knew, that money, property, and domestic authority were closely entwined at Greylake." Bell looked annoyed. "That's a pretty way of saying the husband had cause." "Husbands very often have cause. Wives, cousins, secretaries, and doctors also. One must not become too democratic with motives." Bell stared at him as though uncertain whether he had been mocked. After luncheon, Poirot asked that Mr. Crewe be shown in once more. The secretary arrived with his usual polished gravity, but I fancied there was a faint tension under it now. He sat with admirable propriety, and crossed one elegant ankle over the other. "You wish to speak to me again, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes, about Sir Matthew's private payments." Crewe's eyes flickered once. "I told you all I knew." "Perhaps, but one remembers more the second time." "I am afraid not." Poirot regarded him pleasantly. "You are a very efficient secretary, monsieur. Efficient men are seldom incurious." A thin smile came. "Inward curiosity and outward discretion are not incompatible." "Quite. Then let us be discreetly curious together. Were the payments monthly?" "Approximately." "Always of the same amount?" "Near enough." "And entered nowhere except through the personal account?" "That is so." "Did Sir Matthew ever send you with money instead of cheques?" Crewe hesitated, then said, "Once or twice I carried sealed envelopes to the bank." "Not to a person?" "No." "Did you ever see Sir Matthew meet a woman by the lake?" Crewe's composure altered, only a shade, but enough. "No." "You answer rather quickly." "Because the suggestion is absurd." "Absurd? Why?" Crewe looked annoyed now. "Because Sir Matthew was not a romantic old gentleman conducting assignations in the reeds, if that is your meaning." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "I did not say romantic." There was a pause. At last Crewe said, "If you ask whether Sir Matthew had private concerns beyond the knowledge of his household, the answer is yes. But a secretary is not a confessor." "Nor always a loyal servant," said Poirot softly. Crewe rose half an inch from his chair and sat down again. "If you imply—" "I imply nothing. Not yet." When he had gone, I said at once, "He knows something." "Yes. And he's frightened. Possibly." "For heaven's sake, Poirot." He permitted himself the smallest smile. "My friend, when men like Mr. Crewe are frightened, they do not always fear the police. Sometimes they fear exposure, dismissal, inconvenience, the loss of a good salary, or merely the trouble of being drawn into vulgar scenes." That was irritatingly true. The next interview was with Francis Dean, and if Crewe had concealed knowledge, Francis concealed emotion. She came in pale and hesitant, with her hands clasped tightly together, and from the first it was clear she dreaded the conversation more than any that had gone before. Poirot was gentle with her. "Mademoiselle, I ask only for what may help." "Yes," she said faintly. "You are fond of your cousin?" "Very." "And of Sir Matthew?" She lowered her eyes. "I was grateful to him." That, again, was not quite the same thing. "Did you ever hear him speak of changing his will?" She started. "No." "Did he ever quarrel with Mr. Crewe?" "Sometimes, about letters, about things being mislaid." "What things?" "I do not know." "Did you ever see a woman near the lake?" At that, to my surprise, Francis flushed deeply. "Once?" Poirot sat very still. "When?" "About 3 weeks ago." "Go on." "I was walking after tea and saw someone on the far path by the reeds. At first I thought it was Eleanor because the figure was slight and darkly dressed. But when I came nearer, I saw it was not. The woman had a veil, or a scarf, perhaps, and Sir Matthew was with her." "Did they see you?" "I do not think so. I went back at once." "Why did you tell no one?" Francis gave a small, miserable gesture. "At Greylake, one did not speak of things one was not meant to have seen." Poirot nodded, and I could not help admiring the completeness with which that fitted our growing notion of the dead man. Secret payments, a veiled woman, a missing note, a violent old tyrant. One could almost see the machinery of blackmail grinding away. And Mrs. Ashcombe knew nothing of this? Francis looked startled. "I never told Eleanor." "That was prudent," said Poirot. When she had gone, I said, "There you are. It's exactly what we thought. Poirot did not answer at once. Yes, he said. Exactly. There was something in his tone I did not like. Later that afternoon, Inspector Bell obtained what he considered another useful fact. The bank manager in the nearest town, telephoned to by some energetic subordinate of the police, confirmed that Sir Matthew had indeed drawn several cash cheques in person over recent months, usually in sums too small to attract formal notice, but repeated often enough to appear deliberate. "Blackmail," said Bell with satisfaction. "He was paying somebody regularly, then got a threatening note, then was killed. We're not chasing a fit of temper now. We're chasing a scheme." "Perhaps," said Poirot. Bell turned on him. "You don't agree?" Poirot's expression was mild. "I agree that Sir Matthew paid money. I agree that a veiled woman exists. I agree that a note came by the lake. But agreement with facts is not yet agreement with their arrangement." Bell muttered something about foreign methods and went off to question the gardeners. That evening brought, quite unexpectedly, the nearest thing to a scene that the house had yet produced. It began in the library, where Hugh Ashcombe had been standing with his back to the fire while Mrs. Ashcombe sat by the lamp, pretending rather unsuccessfully to read. I had gone in search of tobacco, and was therefore an accidental witness. Poirot, who had followed me a moment later, remained with me just outside the half-open door. Hugh was speaking in a low, controlled voice, but anger was in every syllable. "You should have told me." Eleanor looked up from the book. "Told you what?" "That Bell knows of the codicil. I learned it only this afternoon." "You might have guessed it before." She shut the book quietly. "What would you have had me do? Warn you? Help you prepare indignation in advance?" The words were sharp enough, but her manner was not. It was Hugh, rather than she, who seemed near losing control. "Don't fence with me, Eleanor. This house has lived on concealments long enough." She rose then, and for the first time I saw something in her face that was not composure, but weariness. "I am very tired, Hugh." "That is not an answer." "No," she said, "but it is true." There followed a pause so charged that I felt at once ashamed of overhearing and unable to move. Hugh spoke again, more quietly now. "Was there anything else your father meant to do that I ought to know?" Eleanor met his gaze. "Nothing that matters now." He gave a bitter laugh. "Everything at Greylake matters too late." At that he turned away and came toward the door. Poirot drew back just in time, and Hugh passed us in the corridor with a curt apology, scarcely seeing us. I said under my breath, "That doesn't look good." "No," said Poirot, "it does not." "Against whom?" He glanced through the doorway where Eleanor still stood by the lamp, very straight, very still. "Against Greylake," he said. It was an infuriating answer. That night, however, Poirot told me more than I expected. We were in my room, and he had come in wearing his dressing gown, and carrying, to my astonishment, one of Sir Matthew's cheque-books, borrowed with Bell's reluctant consent. "Hastings," he said, "observe." He spread the book on the table. Several cheque foils remained, and against certain dates small amounts had been entered in Sir Matthew's spidery hand with no payee named. "You see?" "Yes." Repeated sums. "But not quite regular. There is variation. The dates are not monthly. They correspond, more or less, with Sir Matthew's journeys to Norwich and Yarmouth." I stared. "So he withdrew the money when travelling?" "Apparently." "For meetings?" "Perhaps." "Then the woman may not even have come here until the final note." Poirot nodded. "That is one possibility." I leaned over the chequebook. "Then what is troubling you?" He tapped one narrow finger upon the page. "This entry here. What about it?" The last cash withdrawal was 4 days before the murder. Yet if the note was a new demand, why no further money taken out? I considered. Because he refused to pay this time. Very good. That would make the note an ultimatum. Yes. Well, that's clear enough. Poirot shut the book. Too clear again. Oh, confound it, Poirot. Must every straight line in England be bent to satisfy you? He actually laughed. Hastings, I do not ask that the line be bent. I ask only whether it was drawn by the right hand. I was too sleepy to appreciate such refinements and told him so. He became grave again almost at once. There is another thing. Mrs. Ashcombe came to me in London at once, very promptly, very correctly, with a full account and no concealment of the inheritance. That is either innocence or very great intelligence. You say that every other hour, and yet I have not acted upon it. That is what annoys me. This admission startled me. You really are uncertain. He gave me a level look. Yes, Hastings, entirely uncertain. And that, I think, was the first moment at which I understood that Poirot, for all his confidence of manner, was not merely playing with possibilities as he often did. He was genuinely in doubt. The chapter might have ended there had not the house, which seemed resolved to produce one disturbance for every 24 hours, provided another before midnight. I had just put out my lamp when I heard rapid feet in the corridor, and then a knock at my door. It was Bell, fully dressed, his face hard. Come down at once, both of you. In the hall below, the servants were gathered in whispers, Frances Dean white as paper beside the stairs, and Mrs. Ashcombe standing with one hand on the banister as though she had come down too fast. "What is it?" I asked. Bell turned. "Mr. Crewe has disappeared." For a second no one spoke. Then Mrs. Ashcombe said very clearly, "Disappeared?" Bell nodded. "His bed has not been slept in. His room's been turned over in haste, and one of the small boats from the far landing place is gone." At that, all our neat theories seemed suddenly to stand up and put on flesh. For if Basil Crewe had fled, then either he was a guilty man, or someone wished above all things that we should think him one. Chapter 5. The Letter in the London Post. The disappearance of Basil Crewe altered the whole atmosphere at Greylake in a single hour. Until then, suspicion had lain upon the house like a damp mist, touching everyone and settling nowhere. With the secretary's flight, it seemed for the first time to gather itself into direction. Inspector Bell, who had never cared for Mr. Crewe's elegance, brightened visibly. "A man doesn't clear out in the night for nothing," he said. "Not with his room half ransacked and a boat missing." Poirot, however, was less impressed. "A man clears out for many reasons, Inspector. Murder is only one of them." Bell gave him a look, which plainly meant that such subtleties were a foreign luxury and not required in Norfolk. Still, the practical facts were against Crewe. By noon, word came from Norwich that he had been seen at a small commercial hotel near the station under his own name, an act so foolish that Bell at once declared it a sign either of innocence or nerves. "More likely nerves," he added, and set off with a constable, leaving Poirot and me at Greylake to wait. I spent an uncomfortable morning watching the household pretend not to listen for wheels on the gravel. Hugh Ashcombe remained outwardly composed, but there was in him the strained vigilance of a man who has ceased to hope for justice and is willing to settle for mere survival. Frances Dean started at every sound. Dr. Evans read the paper with the air of a physician determined not to be drawn into family melodrama unless absolutely necessary. Mrs. Ashcombe alone preserved, as always, the decencies of ordinary life. She wrote notes, gave directions to the servants, and once gently corrected Frances when the poor girl dropped a cup. If it was acting, it was beyond anything I had ever seen. Bell returned shortly after 3 o'clock with Crewe in custody. The secretary had changed in a remarkably short time from polished domestic official to hunted man. His tie was awry, his collar soiled, and the smooth superiority with which he had met all previous questioning had cracked into something thin and irritable. He asked first for water, then for a solicitor, and only after some delay consented to speak in Bell's presence, with Poirot and myself also there. "Well," said Bell, "why did you run?" Crewe moistened his lips. "I did not run. I left because I saw plainly that this house meant to make me the scapegoat." "A difficult theory to maintain with your room turned upside down." At that, Crewe flushed. "Yes, because I was looking for something." "What?" He hesitated. "Papers." "What papers?" The answer came with visible reluctance. "Papers connected with my position." Bell folded his arms. "In English, if you please." Crewe looked for a moment as though his fastidious soul recoiled from plain speech. "I had used Sir Matthew's name," he said at last. "On 2 small transfers. Temporarily, I intended to restore the amounts before he ever knew of it. But he had begun to suspect. After his death, I panicked." Bell gave a hard little nod. "Embezzlement, if you must call it that." "I do." This, at least, explained part of the matter. Crewe, fearing that his frauds would now come to light under police scrutiny, had searched frantically for records that might condemn him, found none, and fled when Bell's inquiries began to narrow around the papers. "Did Sir Matthew know the full extent?" asked Poirot. "I do not think so. But he meant to dismiss me. He had become watchful." "Because of the murder note?" said Bell quickly. Crewe stared. "What note?" Bell and Poirot exchanged the briefest glance. Bell then produced the final and most damaging discovery of the day. From Crewe's travelling case, hidden inside a shaving roll, Bell had recovered a partly burnt scrap of paper. It was folded, singed at one corner, and bore only a few surviving words in a large, slanting hand. "Alone. 8 o'clock. Bell laid it on the table as though it were a king on a chessboard. "There," he said, "found among your things. Care to explain it?" For the first time, Crewe seemed genuinely shaken. "I have never seen it before." "No?" "No." Bell's moustache bristled with contempt. "You expect me to believe that?" "It is the truth." Poirot took up the scrap delicately and examined it. I leaned over his shoulder. The hand, even in fragment, had exactly the character Mrs. Ashcombe had described, large, sloping, feminine rather than commercial. "Where," asked Poirot, "did you find this, Inspector?" "In his case, as I said." "Not in his room?" "No, in the hotel." Crewe broke in sharply. "Because someone put it there." Bell let out an incredulous sound. "Yes. No doubt while you were sleeping in your bed at Greylake after not having slept in your bed at Greylake." Crewe looked from one to the other of us with a sudden desperation. "Sir Matthew had private concerns, of course he did. He met people, he wrote things himself. I knew nothing of this note." "You knew enough to run," said Bell. "I ran because of my own damned folly, not because I stabbed him." There was a silence. Poirot asked quietly, "Did you ever see Sir Matthew with a woman?" Crewe's face altered. "Not much, but enough." "Yes." "Ah. Only once, clearly. Near the far side of the lake. Veiled. I thought it best not to know more. That fitted too neatly with everything else. I felt it at once. And yet, instead of satisfying me, it produced a queer inward uneasiness. It was as though the pattern, by coming together, had become less convincing rather than more. Bell, however, had heard enough. "You'll do for the present," he said, and rang for the constable. Crewe was taken away protesting, but with little force. Embezzlers do not as a rule make heroic prisoners. When the door had shut behind him, Bell turned in rough triumph. There now, blackmail or secret dealings, a threatening note, the man with financial dishonesty, suppression of evidence, and then a bolt in the night. That's a case. It is certainly, said Poirot, a case. Bell frowned. You don't sound overjoyed. My joy, Inspector, is always modest. That evening Bell had Crewe formally charged on the lesser matter of fraud, while reserving the murder inquiry. He hoped, as he said, that a night in custody and the prospect of ruin might loosen the man's tongue further. The immediate effect on the house was curious. Hugh Ashcombe was not, of course, publicly cleared, but the direction of suspicion had moved, and everyone felt it. Francis wept in relief. Dr. Evans declared that the police had at last noticed the existence of other sinners in England besides sons-in-law. Even Bell became almost sociable over dinner. Mrs. Ashcombe alone was unchanged. If anything, she seemed more quiet than before, not relieved exactly, but steadier, as though some inward strain had lessened. After dinner, Poirot asked her if he might speak to her privately in the morning-room. She agreed at once, and I, expecting perhaps at last some definitive turn, followed as a matter of course. Hugh would have withdrawn, but Eleanor stopped him with a glance. No. Stay. That one phrase, spoken softly, had in it something of command. Hugh obeyed. Poirot stood before the fire, his hands behind his back. Madame, monsieur, I do not think the case against Mr. Crewe, as it stands, is complete. Hugh drew a breath as though some old pressure returned at once. Then you think Bell may turn back to me? I think Bell will go where Bell is led. That is his duty. Eleanor said calmly, And yours? Poirot looked at her. To understand. She met his gaze without flinching. And do you? There was the briefest pause. No, said Poirot. It was the first time I had heard him admit so plainly before others that the pattern still escaped him. Hugh stared. Eleanor, curiously enough, did not appear surprised. Poirot continued, I believe Mr. Crewe has lied, stolen, concealed, and fled, but I do not yet know that he killed Sir Matthew. Then who did? Cried Hugh. Poirot spread his hands. I cannot say. There was something almost painful in the simplicity of that answer. Eleanor spoke after a moment. You have at least done one thing. What is that, madame? You have prevented the police from taking the easiest road. Poirot bowed slightly. One tries. She said nothing more. Yet there was, I thought, a look between them which I could not decipher. The next day Bell removed Crewe to Norwich. There was no more to be done immediately at Greylake. Poirot examined once again the Chinese room, the side passage, the terrace, and the far landing place. He asked the servants 2 or 3 last questions that yielded nothing. He stood by the lake for 10 full minutes in the afternoon rain without speaking a word. Then, to my astonishment, he announced that we were returning to London the following morning. What? I said. Leaving it like this? Yes. But Poirot! He cut me off. I do not solve crimes by walking round reeds until I get pneumonia. I have the facts. What I lack is the arrangement. Bell was openly displeased. You're giving it up? No. Then why go? Because, Inspector, when the little grey cells refuse to work in Norfolk, one may try whether they prefer London. Bell muttered that local murders apparently lacked Parisian stimulation. Poirot let it pass. We took leave of the household that evening. Francis Dane shook my hand with tearful gratitude. Dr. Evans hoped in his dry fashion that I should not write a book making the medical profession look foolish. Hugh Ashcombe thanked Poirot gravely, with the air of a man too tired for eloquence. Mrs. Ashcombe came last. She stood in the hall under the shaded lamp, wearing black, her fair hair drawn very plainly back, her face pale but unshaken. It struck me then, though I attached no importance to it, that she looked less like a bereaved daughter than like a woman who has passed through an ordeal and means now to stand upright afterward. "You are leaving us," she said. "For the moment," said Poirot. She held out her hand. "Whatever comes of it, I shall not forget that you came when I asked." Poirot bowed over her hand. "I regret only that I do not leave you certainty." Her expression did not change. "Few people ever do." It was, I thought, a singular thing to say, but many things had seemed singular at Greylake, and I had grown tired of assigning them places. We reached London on a bleak afternoon 2 days later. Poirot was silent for most of the journey and, once home, shut himself up with coffee, the timetable, and his own thoughts. I did not disturb him. He had, after all, been baffled before, though seldom for long, and I assumed that after a decent interval he would pounce, as usual, upon the neglected trifle that put the whole matter right. The trifle, when it came, arrived by the second post. George brought in the letter upon a tray. "For you, sir," marked private. Poirot took it, glanced at the hand, and opened it with no more than ordinary attention. Then I saw him go very still. "What is it?" He handed me the sheet without a word. It was a brief note. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I am writing only to thank you. You did not give me the truth, as perhaps you know, but you gave me time, and in this world that is often the more useful gift. Hugh is safe, and that is enough. Please accept the enclosed cheque for your expenses. Yours sincerely, Eleanor Ashcombe." I looked up. Poirot's face had altered in a way I had seen only rarely, not with excitement, but with the cold inward concentration of a man who has at last seen the trap after springing it. "What is it?" I repeated. He took the letter back and laid it beside the remembered fragment from Greylake, which he had apparently brought away in his pocketbook, and now drew out with mechanical precision. "Look, Hastings." I did. At first I saw nothing but 2 examples of a woman's hand. Then gradually, with that sickening slowness by which truth approaches when it ought to have come sooner, I noticed the same long slope, the same heavy downward stroke, the same peculiar form of the capital Y. "The note," I said stupidly. "Yes, but, good God." Poirot closed his eyes for a second. The note at Greylake. The note sent by the lake. The note which summoned Sir Matthew. She wrote it herself. I stared. "Eleanor?" He nodded once. "All from the beginning. She created the veiled woman. She made the boy carry the paper. She invented the blackmail shape and then fed it to us piece by piece until we all saw what she wished us to see. The missing note, the feminine hand, the calm room, the side door. Crewe's panic did the rest for her." I sank into a chair. "No. Yes." "But why write to you like this? Why give herself away?" Poirot's mouth twisted very slightly. "Because she has not quite given herself away, not to the law. This letter is not confession. It is victory." I seized the sheet again. "You mean that phrase? You gave me time?" "Yes. Time to let Bell fasten upon Crewe. Time for Hugh to be released from the easiest suspicion. Time for Greylake to settle around the story of a frightened secretary and a dead tyrant. And perhaps," his voice altered, "time to become once more the admirable daughter and loyal wife." I could hardly breathe. "Then she killed her own father?" Poirot looked at the rain-patterned window. "Yes." "For money?" He was silent so long that I thought he might not answer. "At least partly," he said at last. "For money, for freedom, for Hugh, perhaps even for the long humiliation of years. Such motives are not separate in houses like Greylake. They grow together." And Crew? A convenient coward. She knew his weakness or guessed it. Perhaps she planted the burnt fragment among his things before he fled. Perhaps after. It scarcely matters now. Poirot, we must go to Belle at once. He gave one sharp movement of impatience. And tell him what? That a lady's ordinary handwriting resembles a half-burnt scrap which only proves she may have written a note? That her letter of thanks is phrased with intelligence? Belle will smile, shrug, and ask for evidence. He will be right. I got up and began to pace. But you said you suspected her self-command. I suspected many things, said Poirot harshly. I did not know. That is the point. She asked for my help, and I gave it. She placed the board, arranged the pieces, and invited me to admire the game. And I, who pride myself on seeing the psychology, saw only its outline. He picked up the letter once more and looked at it with a kind of bitter respect. Mon Dieu, but she played it well. There was nothing to say to that. After a moment he folded the note very neatly and placed it back in its envelope. What will you do? For the present, he said. Nothing. Nothing? No. I have been beaten, Hastings. It is not a common experience, and I do not enjoy it. But I recognize it. He sat down then with a weariness I had never before seen in him after a case, and his next words I remember exactly. She came to me because she understood something essential. If Hugh were accused, I would work to save him. If an obvious man appeared, Belle would seize him. If the motive wore blackmail's face, we should all look outward from the family before we looked back in. She did not merely commit the crime. She used our minds as part of it. He tapped the envelope lightly. And now, because she knows that I know too late, she sends me my fee. I do not know what expression was on my own face. I know only that the room had become suddenly colder, and that Greylake, which had seemed from the first a house of secrets, now took on in retrospect a far more terrible character. For the thing had not been done in frenzy, fear, or desperate chance. It had been planned with patience, played with nerve, and finished with courtesy. Poirot gave a short, mirthless laugh. For once, Hastings, the lady did not come to the detective for justice. She came for an audience. And with that, the case of Greylake was ended. Some of you have asked if there's another way to support us right now. There is one we'd like to share, and it's something my wife and I created together. Alongside Nocturnal Tales, we wrote a children's book called Sherlock Paws and the Diamond of the Nile, available on Amazon. It's a classic detective story, reimagined for younger readers, with one important twist. Sherlock Holmes is a dog. In this story, Sherlock Paws and his loyal companion Dr. Spot set off on an adventure to Egypt, where a valuable diamond has vanished. With noses twitching and tails wagging, they rely on observation, logic, and attention to detail to uncover the truth. It's a mystery full of friendship, travel, and discovery, adventurous, but always warm and age-appropriate. The goal of the book is simple: to introduce children to detective thinking in a way that feels playful and engaging. Instead of noise and spectacle, the story rewards curiosity. Children are encouraged to notice clues, think things through, and enjoy how small details matter, just as they do in classic mysteries. If you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or young readers in your family, this is a story we genuinely believe they might enjoy. And if you're looking for a way to support our work during this difficult period, purchasing the book helps us directly, while giving something tangible, thoughtful, and fun in return. As always, there's no obligation. We simply wanted to share something we made together with the same care we put into everything else. The link is in the description, and thank you truly for being here. Epilogue. I saw Mrs. Eleanor Ashcombe once again, though not at Greylake. It was nearly 8 months later in London, at the close of a charitable musicale in aid of some admirable cause for which fashionable women are always willing to sell tickets, provided that the misery relieved is at a tasteful distance. Poirot had been invited by a Belgian baroness of his acquaintance, and I had gone with him partly from loyalty and partly because I had been given to understand that the soprano was exceptionally pretty, which proved, as such things often do, to be untrue. The rooms were crowded, the conversation thin, and the tea deplorable. I had already begun to wonder whether even politeness required one to remain, when I saw, across a glitter of shoulders and uniforms, a fair head turn beneath a shaded lamp. It was she. Mrs. Ashcombe, though no longer, I think, quite that in the sense I had known her at Greylake, stood speaking to an elderly woman in mauve satin, with that same composed attention I remembered so well. She was in black still, but not in heavy mourning. Time had refined rather than softened her. There was colour in her face now, and her expression, though self-contained, no longer carried the strain I had once taken for courage under grief. She looked, I thought, like a woman who had rid herself of a weight, and meant never again to stoop beneath one. I touched Poirot's arm. He had seen her already. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she turned, met our eyes across the room, and came toward us at once. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, quiet, clear, with that inflection of perfect breeding which in some women can pass for sincerity even when one knows better. Poirot bowed. "Madame." She gave me her hand and then looked at him. I wondered whether we should meet again. "So did I," said Poirot. There was no challenge in the words, yet I felt one all the same. She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps London is smaller than one imagines." "Or memory longer," said Poirot. At that, something like acknowledgement passed between them. It was not warmth. It was not hostility. It was, I think, the recognition of two people who had once played a game together under mortal stakes, and had since had ample time to consider the other's skill. I said, because someone had to say something ordinary, "I trust your husband is well." She turned to me at once. "Yes, very well. We are abroad much of the time now. It suits him." "And Greylake?" "It is let." That, from her, was all. Yet I understood in an instant that she had no intention of ever living there again. A woman in pearls approached and claimed her for some committee matter. Before she turned away, however, Mrs. Ashcombe looked once more at Poirot. "I have often thought," she said, "that some houses make monsters of ordinary people." Poirot's face did not alter. "And some people," he said, "need no assistance from the house." For the first time, she seemed genuinely moved, not hurt exactly, but touched at some deeper place where reproach and truth are not easily separated. Then she inclined her head. "Perhaps." And with that she went. I looked at Poirot. "Well?" He watched the place where she had vanished into the crowd. "She will never confess," he said. "No. She will probably never kill again." I stared. "How can you know that?" He shrugged. "Because Greylake was not only a place but a history. The crime grew there for years before the dagger entered the flesh. Remove the soil, and such things do not always flower twice." "That is a charitable view." "No," said Poirot. "Only an exact one." We left soon after. Outside the air was cool and damp, and London shone in the usual manner as though vice, charity, and boredom were merely different lamps in the same street. As we drove home, I said after a long silence, "You still mind it, don't you?" Poirot adjusted the fall of his glove. "Yes." "Because she escaped?" He considered. "Partly, but more because she understood vanity. Not the vanity of the peacock, Hastings, the vanity of the craftsman. She knew that if she made the problem sufficiently interesting, I would enter it. She did not only deceive me, she recruited me. That was, I think, as close as Poirot ever came to admitting a wound. After another pause, he added in a tone almost meditative, "There are criminals who are brutal, foolish, greedy, or desperate. One pursues them with satisfaction. But the rare one who has intelligence, patience, nerve, and the courage to remain in the room, to look one in the face and ask for help, that is another matter. Such people are dangerous because they understand that detection is not only about facts, it is about where one chooses to look." He glanced out into the wet London dark, and for once I looked where she wished. He said no more, but I have sometimes thought since that the true end of the Greylake affair lay not in Sir Matthew Carberry's death, nor in Basil Crewe's ruin, nor even in that letter which arrived too late in London. It lay in that brief meeting months afterward, when a woman who had won by intelligence and audacity stood before the only man who fully knew it, and neither accusation nor triumph was possible between them. There are defeats from which one learns. There are others which merely remain. For Poirot, I think, Greylake was the second kind.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, do subscribe and share it with someone who appreciates a proper mystery. It helps more than most people think, and it remains one of the simplest ways to help this show continue. If you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. And if you'd like to support our work more directly, you can do so on Patreon. Tiers start at $2.99 with ad-free listening and extra stories, or for occasional support via Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. All links are in the description. Thank you for listening. And now, be fair before you are certain, and do not let confidence outrun the facts. Good night.